What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
I've been looking forward to this one. Welcome, Jack Butcher, to the Learning Leader Show. It's great to talk to you, man.
Thanks for having me on, Ron. I appreciate it, mate.
I've told you before we started recording, I'm a big fan of what you do and how you do it. And so I'm excited to dive in. But first, Jack, one of the biggest themes that I love to study is excellence, particularly people who have sustained excellence over an extended period of time. And you've worked in corporate America, you've worked as an entrepreneur, you're a designer, you are a very interesting thinker. I'm curious, from your perspective, what have you found to be some of the commonalities among people who have sustained excellence over an extended period of time?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is it's kind of there's a little irony in the answer, or a little contradiction in the answer. It's typically people who don't think they're very good or don't think they're very accomplished always have something they can learn from anybody they encounter or any situation they're in. To me, I think, the most growth I've experienced personally is kind of being in situations where you don't have a clue what you're doing, and that's kind of humbling to the point of needing to skill that. And in this token, like when I've plateaued, it's been a result of not forcing challenge or not getting into situations where, you easily plateau if you're in situations where exactly what's going to happen as a result of your actions. I was actually talking about this with a friend of mine last night. The idea of, if you know what's going to happen before you take an action, it's kind of a pointless action, or there's no real growth to be had on the other side of that decision. So I think that, the combination of putting yourself in scenarios where you are inexperienced and doing things that you don't necessarily know are going to occur in a perfect, like these scenarios that aren't perfect. I think that's where, people pick up the extra skills and kind of fill in all the gaps in their competency and stay competitive and stay great at what they're doing. It's really about finding environments that you're an amateur in, to be honest.
It's interesting you say that. I've purchased a couple of the courses that you've put out, and I absolutely love them. We'll get into them at some point here during our conversation. But one of the things I noticed about them is I wanted to ask you is, what is your prep before you start filming a video? Because I've noticed at times you'll leave in your mistakes, you'll spell a word wrong and have to wipe it out and rewrite it. You'll say something that maybe it wasn't perfect, and so you have to restate it in a way that makes it better. And I find that charming and enjoyable and real and authentic. And I know from building my own course, though, and maybe I'm a little ashamed of this. When I mess up, I would reshoot the whole thing, and it took forever to make these videos because I would mess something up and I would then reshoot it. What's your thought process around? Basically, it sounds like one take. It feels like, as a student, that you do one take and it's the first take, and then you publish it. And I'd love to hear your mindset around that.
Yeah. Doesn't come off as ill-prepared or incorrect. I think a lot of it is honestly kind of parallel to a lot of the stuff that I'm teaching in the course too. A lot of the principles of it is get things out there, take action. And is that mistake really taking away from the message you're communicating? Is it detrimental to the lesson? And in most cases, no. If there are probably a couple of takes that left on the floor where I'm just I completely run out of steam, or the thought just goes out of my head entirely and you just blank. But if it's correctable in the moment, a lot of, the two courses that are out there are really about get your work out there. Don't be as much of a perfectionist as maybe you've been taught to in an environment that I don't really know if perfectionism is rewarded the way we think, and get in a place where like the ability to publish is prioritized, and obviously you wouldn't put out anything that doesn't contain the information that it needs to contain, but these little slip-ups and little mistakes. When I was first starting my journey, I was in a very similar position. It's scripting out a video and reading it line by line, and then I watch it back and I was like, this feels like super mechanic, and I don't think people are going to want to follow along with this in the same way. And I actually get like everything I record, it goes through my wife as a filter, so she watches this stuff and it's like, oh, I messed up, do you think this is like, do you think I need to re-record this entire 20-minute stint because I had to erase something in the middle? She's like, what do you mean? Definitely not, just keep it. And I think the genuine, you build a kind of a bond through that with your remote audience. I think everybody slips up, and no matter how much of a subject matter expert you are, there are obviously mistakes going to be made in communication, but the medium allows you to correct yourself in real time, and I think that like authenticity and the bond with the teacher is as important as the lesson at this point. So trying to be, and it's tough, it's tough to kind of put that stuff out there, and some people might watch that and be like, oh, this guy didn't even like try to correct his mistakes, or some people could interpret that way. It hasn't happened to date, like I haven't heard anything like that, but yeah, it's been interesting, and it's great to hear that feedback, because it just it kind of more potential, right? If you have permission to just like create in real time, and if you make a mistake, just rub it out and carry on, you're gonna communicate with more people, you're gonna create more stuff, you're gonna just be more prolific as a result of not being like an absolute perfectionist. And that for perfection is probably a bit of character and a bit of what you're describing, which is kind of this organic feeling relationship that you can build.
One of the things I've gathered from watching a lot of your videos and reading your work and looking at the visuals you create, when you speak, you seem to be very comfortable in your own skin and exude confidence, and that it's hard when you deconstruct how does somebody develop that. You can go a million different directions, and I'm curious if you have to self-reflect and share how you've built this charisma and confidence. What would you say? What do you think it's taken over the years to where you can sense that you have the confidence to have mistakes and leave them on tape, and then you fix them and share in a way that we are drawn closer to you? I think that's a magnetic quality that all leaders, regardless if they do design work or not, like you do. In fact, most people don't, who are listening and watching, but they do want to develop that confidence, that magnetism, that charisma, because it can create followers. And that's what leaders are trying to do. How do you think you've built that up over the years?
Great question, and thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it. I think one of the biggest, I mean, there are a few things, so let me try and separate them out. I think having one particular great mentor earlier in my career, there's this one moment that stands out to me. I've done a little bit of reflecting on this idea. There's this one moment really early on in my career. I was maybe 6 months in, 12 months into being a designer, and I was working for a guy who's like 25 years of experience, Madison Avenue, done everything you could possibly imagine in that world, and designer, art director, copywriter, strategist. So it's like a bit of a polymath in the advertising world. And there was this one afternoon where I was presenting some work or sharing some work in progress to present to a client eventually. And I showed up with, I guess, my laptop or a piece of paper at the time. I don't exactly remember the specifics, but I put it on the table and I instantly was like, well, this is not very, like, this isn't right, or this, I can't remember the exact language I used, but I was essentially saying, you know, this isn't as good as it should be. Can you take that into consideration before you look at it? And he's like, why are you showing me then? He's like, I don't want to see it. If you're going to lead with that, why are you bringing it to me? And I think that was like a huge light bulb in my mind, which was there's a couple parallel tracks. I think one is like, never like discount what you're doing to somebody, you know, prior to showing it to them. You're completely taking the wind out of your sails. And the second is kind of, you know, it would have been better for me to say it's not ready, I need more time, or to just frame it up differently. That's like one tiny component of it. I think over the longer term, that is developed really by like knowing the work and believing in the work you're doing. So in the world of like advertising, marketing, branding, all of that, you know, strategy, like so much of that is like constructing a story and knowing what that story is. And I really struggled later on in my career in bigger teams, honestly, because like delegating different parts of that story, and how do you know, how does this person's work integrate with that person's work? And that's, you know, it's an incredible quality of leadership to be able to bring people together and tell a cohesive story. I think a lot of the practice that I put in earlier in my career is kind of owning like a full iteration of that story. So if someone asks you a question, you could answer at every level. It's like just similar to the, you know, when you're back in school and it's like, show your work, don't just show up with the answer, like explain how you got there. I think everybody who produces anything of value can do that work. It's just a lot of us are kind of trained not to do it. So I think kind of stripping back from what you're presenting or what you're selling and kind of understanding the things that fit together to make it possible, or the things that doing all of that, I think that gives you like confidence and defend anything you're presenting. So and I'm talking in the specific context of presentation because that's kind of my bread and butter and my background. But the idea that the work that you're going to present, if you can kind of defend it, if you can imagine, this is, I think, a thought process that occurs sometimes, like, what would the worst critic of this work say? Like the most like vicious critic have to say about this thing I'm building or this thing I'm presenting, and how would I respond to that critique? I think if you have a working understanding of like those attack vectors, like, have you done your research? Do you know like why you're presenting this? That I think is the sort of foundation of speaking confidently and you know, having sort of command over a room audience or anything that any situation where you're trying to convince people of something, it behooves you to have done your research and understand the things that inform what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think the regular practice of putting yourself in the position of, I always like to say, okay, we're going to have a debate, and there are actually organized debate teams in college, and had a few guests on here that have been a part of those debate teams. And one of the practices that is useful for any leader, I think, is to debate the argument from both sides.
Yeah,
Whatever it may be. And so if you regularly are putting yourself, okay, I have to now, sometimes in actual debate, you don't get to choose. So there's one side here and there's one side here, and then they assign you a side, and you have to then do the work and debate that side, and also be prepared for what they're going to say. I think taking that approach to whether you're a manager getting up and speaking in front of your team, or you're launching a new project, or you're sharing results, whatever it may be, thinking about having that mindset of what would you say? What would the worst critic say? How would I respond to that? Have you done your research? Just thinking with that frame of mind can build a great deal of confidence, because unfortunately, let's just face it, most people don't do that.
right. Yeah, and if you've gotten to the conclusion, you probably have the arguments in the tank. You just haven't necessarily like focused on what they might be.
Yeah.
And times out of 10, don't hear them. But if you know that you have them ready to go, it's kind of like, it's just, it's insurance, almost like walk into a room knowing that you can defend your position. Even if you don't have to defend it, you're going to present it more confidently. So it's, like, I'm not saying that this to be like get yourselves in positions where you constantly have to like aggressively defend what you're doing. That's not necessarily the point, even though it might be like possible or feasible for you to do so. But the idea that you could, if necessary, I think gives, at least in my case, it gives me more confidence in presenting an idea if I feel like I've done my homework on it and I understand it myself.
Yeah. So, Jackie, your story, you spent about a decade in corporate advertising in New York City. You said you've loved it, but one of the issues was, you said you've written only a very small percentage of those minutes were spent clarifying and articulating the value of specialized businesses, which is what you're really good at. You've self-identified, I would agree, as a consumer of your work, is something you're really good at. And one of the things you started building was called visualize value. And I would love for you to first unpack what visualize value actually means in your mind.
Sure. So it was a long and interesting journey getting to that point. So designer by trade, and in an agency environment or in a corporate setting, your design skills are kind of deployed against whatever work comes in the door. So one day you might be designing a website for chocolate band, the next might be, doing some internal marketing thing for a company, Christmas party, whatever it might be. There's just like all of these different applications of your skills and all of this experimentation, as it were. So I think the combination of just like deploying a skill that can kind of take on any creative brief is empowering, and it's very like you kind of get lost in it at the same time too. It's like I think a lot of people, they have, and they can kind of solve any problem. It's just like you can lend yourself to all of these different things. And it was actually only when I started my own business 3 years ago that I found the need to get more specialized in the application of my skills. So I started with this idea of essentially emulating the companies that I'd worked for in the past. So start an agency, find clients, publish a book of different projects, and just try and attract people and pitch them our services, and come up with a unique solution for every problem that people have. And I quickly realized like the only way to continue to scale that business is to hire more people, have more project management staff, have very like broad outreach and marketing that then translates to these really complex pitch processes, and get very specific, like so many specific different conversations and different objectives going on. So it was like this backward reflection of how do I figure out what I'm like at least semi-uniquely positioned to do. And looking back, I think this refers back to the last like section of the conversation we were having. One of the things that I enjoyed doing and was decent at in my agency career was the strategic component of the process. So visualizing the strategy that we would eventually sell, that would become the TV commercial or the web infrastructure or whatever it might be, not the end product, but the articulation of the strategy that sold in the end product. So that piece of it, I was like, well, why not use that as a front end asset for businesses that really struggle to articulate what they do? And I had a couple friends that ran they're small businesses, like professional services, like very specialized marketing agencies that work with a specific vertical or a specific type of person. They have a very unique and proprietary process for acquiring clients. So the normal way of selling that would just be get on the phone and kind of, you know, just pitch with a script and hope that someone converts, as opposed to, like, I was like, well, we could work together and I could figure out how to actually visualize the process you take a client through and how the technology you're using works to get a result. So it really is like, you know, referring back to the last piece of this conversation, it's how do you make that argument visual, and then what can you apply that ability to as a service. So one component of it is helping businesses articulate their value proposition, which is typically like complex software or professional services. People that need need to create an edge in their storytelling to like explain what they do. And then the consumer side of the brand, or the, I guess the larger market side, I wouldn't even call it consumer brand really, but the idea of how do you take that same principle that can be applied really specifically to like a sales pitch for a B2B business exercise, to like how can you visualize concepts and ideas that people can leverage on a daily basis to like improve their life, or, you know, think more strategically about their business. And that really like came about as an exercise to get clients for the business side of things. So like demonstrating my ability to articulate things visually, and just used content that was more, that appealed to a wider market of people, as opposed to like trying to sell that service by just publishing case studies of like supply chain companies and things like that. Because while it's like impressive, if you don't know that industry, you don't really understand. You don't have that epiphany of like, wow, I understand that idea more clearly because I've seen it articulated visually. So that and there's more to this answer as well, but there's like that informs like the types of products that we want to add to the portfolio, because it's kind of helping people do that same thing themselves. So how do you better articulate what you're great at? How do you better convince people that you are the, solution to problem X, and trying to create the tools to help people become more comprehensive communicators?
Gotcha. So I want to do a couple things, Jack, if you're up for it. So first, this may relate to selling the sawdust, and we'll explain what that means in a second. And second, maybe we can sketch out a quote that really speaks to me and speaks to, I think, my audience and what I'm trying to do, if you're cool with that.
Yeah, sounds
cool.
Good. Let's do it.
So first, so I think this applies to anybody in a business setting, running a team, running a business. And I'll quote you, and then maybe I can be the example. Maybe we could role play real quick about what it would sound like if I was coming to you for help, so you can explain how you do this. So I'm gonna read a little bit about some things that you've written that have spoke to me as far as how you do what you do. When building a narrative to sell a service or product, there's three things: use clear, concise, and descriptive language. Leverage visuals to expand upon your ideas, and break down what you do. And I like this part: break down what you do into transformations. So clear, concise, descriptive language, leverage visuals to expand upon your ideas, break down what you do into transformations. So Jack, in order to illustrate this and actually use some practical application, let's talk about what I do. And maybe we can share. So I struggle with this, and this is something that I want to get better at, because this whole thought process around leadership development is so broad. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of noise out there when it comes to leadership development. And when I was working with my publisher for my first book, the whole message was you have to niche down to something specific. And so I chose that time when you want from individual contributor to manager for the first time. And the book's called Welcome to Management, and it's done well and it's worked. But still, my podcast called The Learning Leader Show, and I'm fascinated by helping others become learning leaders, become the type of people that are on this trajectory like this, always working to get better. This mindset of never arrived, always becoming, which I got from JJ Redick on this show. But that's really what I'm thinking about, and that's what I want to do and help people. But is that a transformation? I don't know. And I love maybe to workshop this real quick with you, however your brain works when you hear some of the things I'm spitting out at you in this very broad, huge sea of leadership development. And what are some of the things that come to mind when I say this to you? Or maybe you have questions, I don't know, but I'm curious.
Yeah. No, I think where my head immediately goes when you talk about I guess the first question is the objective to expand beyond the individual contributor to the management position? You're talking
Yes.
about a layer above that, or we could.
Yes, because that was a focus of a singular book, and I certainly have clients that are in that position, and I work with them. But that is just one aspect of what I want to do.
Mm-hmm. So I think where I would go, where I would start to ask questions is kind of understanding like the individual components of that transformation. So a lot of the work I do with the B2B clients that we work with is so much of it is about, and this is kind of becoming clearer and clearer to me as I build products out myself, is really about kind of a curriculum, like the way you teach and the way you think is organized like a curriculum. You know, I think most people have all of that IP kind of bundled up, and they can pull from, you know, one scenario or another in a specific context, but very few people ever organize that into a sort of sequence of principles that build on one another, if that makes sense. So you trying to start at like the philosophical level or the foundational level of work really well in how we have been helping people articulate transformation is like, what are the first of the things you need to unlearn in order to take on this transformation? So what are the myths or there is a word for it that I can't recall right now, but the transformation. And I think because you're operating in such a noise, you can view that as an opportunity to say what you're doing incorrectly, right? And most of the time, regardless of what you do, it's people skipping over the foundation and going straight to the tactics, or trying to get a quick win, do X, Y, and Z, and in 3 weeks you'll be this. I mean, in my eyes, I've never come across something that can create sustainable change by selling a product like that. I think going back to the root of why this is a problem in the first place and what people have been sold or bought into that isn't getting them the result. How do you, like, if you're helping people make a transformation, I think the first component of that is like debugging the code. You know, it's like, where is it broken to begin with? What can we isolate, and how can we start to organize those things in the order in which you have to unlearn them? Is this making sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, but it is. I think it's the reason I like this is because it's what you do is you force me to think deeper about the problem and about how, instead of just saying, well, here's the obvious answer, because that's not helpful. What's helpful, not helpful long term at least, what's helpful long term
Mhm.
is to tweak how you think about problems, or think how you attack a specific market that may be super noisy. And that's why you can see me taking so many notes and thinking about, okay, how do I really think about this? And as you mentioned too, creating a sequence, I think is an important aspect of it that you've, and I noticed in your courses that I've taken, they are sequential. Maybe you talk a little bit more about like how you've created this sequential aspect to your teaching.
Yeah, so I think this applies to the question you asked as well. The idea that so many products or services are all focused on the symptom, right? And I think the symptom is obviously a pain point that you can use to help people understand that help people identify with the problem they're experiencing. But so much of the prescriptions that are given out are like attacking or masking a symptom that isn't ultimately going to get resolved through being masked or being covered up or being distracted from. So I guess the simplest way is like, if you think about it like a spectrum, like there's a source at one end and there's a symptom at the other end. And like the beginning of your message, at least when somebody is experiencing the product or service, needs to start at the source. A lot of the marketing is going to come from the symptom end. And I think, it's very easy to get caught up in the things that are resonating in your marketing, transferring straight into your product. But the real, I think, the results, the experienced have been, you want to take someone back to the source and say, the reason you're experiencing this symptom is because you've been thinking about this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, and this wrong. And these are the tools that you need to install in order for, the action you take in the future to eliminate the possibility of you experiencing that symptom. And some of it will be, some of it won't be eliminating symptoms. It will be, you need to think about this symptom differently, because maybe you think that this is, a negative thing, but in a lot of cases, even just the way you think about the problem you're experiencing, if you can shift your perspective on that, it can completely change, the trajectory you're on too. So, so much of it is, and it's really hard to position this as like a product. A lot of the time it's like, you just have to change the way you think and everything will be great, but it's about changing the way you think in the upfront. So, that eventually filters into the way you act and the way you implement and all of those things. Like, you have to fix the source. It's really hard to sell like the long journey and the principles, but they save you so much time in the long run, because you're acting from a better set of rules and a better operating system, as it were. And that's kind of, I guess, to come full circle on the question you asked, it's like an operating system for a leader in environment X is like that telling to talk about what you're doing. To boil it down, something that feels like, it's this foundational, you're getting this foundational benefit, because you say it's such a broad subject. It's like parents are leaders, corporate employees are leaders, entrepreneurs are leaders. Positive, I think, would think of themselves as a leader, or they should at least. And that's another piece of it, right? Like, most people who are leaders don't think of themselves as leaders, or haven't stepped into their role as a leader. And like, there's so much to unpack there, and even, reframe the idea of, to be a leader, you need to be, you need to know the answer to every single question that anybody ever asks you. That's a misconception that I would start a course like that with. It's not about that. It's about, honestly, it's more about the frequency in which you say I don't know is probably correlates with how good of a leader you are.
Yeah, I love it. All right, you want to do a sketch on the fly here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so the quote that I've chosen for audio listeners, this won't be as good, so I would go to YouTube. But it's, I don't know, as we talk through it, it could be good. But I this is in the vein of you, Jack, because I've seen how you seem to be able to operate with confidence in uncertain environments without knowing the end result. I highly doubt you've practiced this. I know I sent you over the quote via DM a week ago, but I think you got a lot going on. So the quote I've chosen is from Pat Riley, and it speaks to me because I'm asked a lot, how would you define excellence? And I've written and rewritten notes, and what I came up with came from him, which is excellence is the gradual result of always striving to do better. So excellence is the gradual result of always striving to do better. It's simplistic, but so true. And so excellence is the gradual result of always striving to do better. And so for audio, Jack is using his tool now to create and I have no idea what you're about to do, but I think it's pretty cool to see you do your work here in real time. I maybe walk us through what you're thinking as you're putting this together.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a great quote for a number of reasons. Obviously, there's a lot of truth to it, but I think the way the most compelling translation of idea to visual is like when there's some kind of logic or story embedded in the quote itself. So obviously when you read this, excellence is a gradual result. It's kind of, there's an implication of time or something happening over there's a start point, or there is no end point, but there's definitely motion happening there, right? So there's a bunch of simple ways to do this. I think the first visual that comes to my mind is how familiar you are with like financial charts, but there's so many interesting parallels to like human behavior in the way financial assets are plotted on charts. So one of the ideas that comes to my head is kind of like, as a leader, your objective is to just constantly set a new baseline, right? So there's gonna be resistance, and I think this idea of striving to do better doesn't necessarily mean you are always gonna do better. Mm-hmm. It just means like there's an upward trajectory, there's an intentional upward trajectory happening.
You're striving. You're always striving to do better. It doesn't mean you're always going to do better, but that the mindset is that we're always striving for it.
Yeah. So the way the visual that comes to mind
in this program you're using is called.
This is called Sketch. There's a version of this, or it's essentially the same software. It's called Figma, and you can play around with it online for free. Sketch, I think, is $100, but it's, so the way I would think about it is kind of, you see they're kind of these points of resistance that you're hitting up against, and maybe there's some serious volatility happening. But ultimately, over the course of time, you're I think people can understand let me just distribute these evenly, understand the idea of like coming up against resistance. And there are moments in time where you have these like, dips, and you're gonna struggle. I think another idea, let me just do a couple versions of this.
How
So
much?
I think,
Yeah, go ahead.
go on, go.
No, I was just curious about your. I think you've written about this, but this has to be so attractive for the client work. But I know you're trying to do less of that. But how much client work are you doing now versus the product work?
Probably about 15-20% client work.
Do
I
you
think there's
do you this may be a dumb question, but given that your desire more is to do more of the product so you can I guess the age old phrase where you make money while you sleep, kind of like passive income because you build it once and sell it a million
mhm.
times. But what's the name of your course? That one of the courses I bought is called Build Once, Sell Twice. um the I is it um one of my friends, when I said, "Hey, someone just asked me to do this type of," it was kind of like one-on-one work, and I wasn't super excited about the person, and I said, "I don't know what to do," and a mentor said, "Price it at a rate that is just
Mhm.
insane. It's just insane." And if they say yes, then it's like, well, at least you kind of. This may sound trite or bad, but he's like, if you get it, then you're doing well financially, and maybe you'll actually like it. And so that's what I did, and it actually happened and it worked. And now I've scaled back that amount of work with one-on-one people and only have less than five, because I pick and choose the ones that are actually friends and people I want to work with on a one-on-one basis, and don't really do that anymore. But is that like how you think about this? Do you think about, if from a client perspective, I'm just going to make my rates at a level that are insane and people still say yes, or how do you do it?
So I think there's two components to it. One is like there's like, and I don't know if this is a story I'm telling myself, but there's like a necessity to operate in the market in order to be,
Yep.
to be able to translate what you're learning as a teacher or as a as a builder of product. It's important to like, keep your eye on the ball and understand the market and get that practice. So a lot of it is like, a lot of the decisions on the B2B side are made through that lens of like, is this going to make me a better communicator? Is this going to help me understand an industry that I think is a very, like relevant to understand, or is it going to round out my skill set? The beauty of a lot of these engagements is that just like you work with people that are so talented and they have like exposure and experience to all these industries that I've never been a part of, but I get a ton out of it selfishly as a um as a partner, just having them like espouse their knowledge.
Hmm.
And that's one piece of it. I think the something that's like what the trajectory of the client service stuff, like actually working with someone now to help them build a curriculum. So much of what we're doing on the product side is kind of translating to the service side and making it more and more scalable. So I think the more you prove yourself as a practitioner, the irony is like the less practitioner work you need to do. So like strategic, strategic conversations about how you would break down, let's say, for example, Ryan Hawk's um, learning leader curriculum. How would
Hmm.
you structure that? How would you put all these ideas together? And then, there are components in there that should be visualized. There are concepts that need to plug into one another. How can we make that happen? It was really, really manual when we started doing it. So we'd do an interview and then we just create something, and kind of hand it over, but collaborative with time, because I think there's, the the visual piece is definitely what attracts people in the front door, but the strategy component, get the idea to some cohesive narrative, is now like, I think, the more valuable part of the service. And trying to find some people to help with the visual stuff, there's definitely not a ton of people with that experience, but yeah, wanting to keep those interesting relationships going on the client side, because I think it makes us like build more compelling products rather
Yeah.
than just building products in a vacuum. So that's
Makes sense. And I mean, I think that's one of the values too of having an advising and consulting role is you get exposure, especially if you have the luxury to pick your clients, which I'd imagine you do. You get exposure to brilliant people doing fascinating things, and you can learn so much while you're working, while you're helping them. And I think that's something I personally value with some people I work with. I'm thinking I'm learning just as much or more than they are,
yeah.
because of I'm getting exposure to them and their teams, and I'm there actually to help them. So okay, let's get back to the drawings you've done. Now this is the third one. Do you want to go through this one and the second one as well?
Yeah, so I think
Oh, this is sweet, man. This is so cool.
this idea of, I should redraw this line, but this idea of the being the, it's almost this thing you can't feel in real time, right? It's like there are some
Yep.
parallels with the way like money compounds
Mhm.
slowly, then all at once. It's kind of like while you weren't looking, and then suddenly you show up, and it's like, wow, I've really come a long way. But it's so gradual in the moment.
Mhm.
That's something that I think we can try and depict visually as well. So excellence is really like depicted by this line, but your behavior is kind of erratically happening around it. That makes sense. So
Mhm.
there's an improvement happening at the macro level, but it doesn't feel like it on the micro level. I think that's kind of a
And almost the key to this is the fact that consistency is a big deal to me. I feel like it is to you too, but the fact of
mhm,
showing up, we're talking about this specific quote of excellence is the gradual result of always striving to do better. When I see the visual that you're creating here, it means though this stops if you stop showing up. If you stop doing the
mhm.
work, these ups and downs and the kind of the
Yeah,
roller
it
coaster.
just
Yeah.
looks more like that. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Like you stop and it's over. And that's hard though. And it's not sexy to consistently show up, or even reliability, dependability, consistency. None are sexy words, but that is what's a critical component to this idea of excellence and this gradual result of always striving to do better. And that's how we get this upward trajectory here.
Yeah, I think there's a good friend of mine and client. I don't know if you know him, Carl Richards. He does a
Mhm.
lot of he does some work in the financial space, but it's a very similar principle to trading versus investing. So you look at a financial chart on any given day, there's so much volatility. If you zoom out to 3 decades, it's just this up and to the right.
Yeah.
Like that's, I think, a lot of a lot of our inability as people. I think even this is like way like really exaggerated with the internet, but that we like linearly, and we experience life a day at a time, a moment at a time, but
Mhm.
we're really bad at understanding the compound function and the exponential function. And the internet just, I think, like makes that even more difficult to comprehend. It's like, if you add 1% to uh, the audience of people that are listening to you every day for 10 years, even if you start at 100 people, it's just bonkers what it ends up as.
Mhm.
And the internet is like, uh, it's just this supernatural thing that it's very hard for people to comprehend. And until you've experienced it personally, you don't get it. And I think that's why you see so many like runaway examples of success of like digital businesses. And then there's so many on the other side of that line that haven't, that didn't get to the point of experiencing the compounding and gave up before it kicked in.
Mhm.
So that to me is like, but again, even the people that get to that level beyond the compound interest, you stop showing up, there's
It's over.
zero
It's over.
wasn't common. Yeah. So these things, like principles, apply across the board. That's a great quote.
Can you walk me through the 3 pictures here and how you've got to this point here?
Yeah. So the first one, I think, is a variation on the last one we showed, but it's kind of like, you wanted to depict this as levels. I think maybe, if you exist within a structure, or if there are milestones that you want to break. These would also work really well as like motion, visuals in motion. You kind of have this, iterative thing. You never get there. There is no destination. It's just like there are new measurements along the way, and you'll fall below them,
and that arrow doesn't stop. I think, it would be cool. Like, I'm visualizing a slide as I'm on a stage, and you actually see the line moving,
right?
Behind you, and as long as you keep showing up and keep consistently focusing on doing the work, the line, you'll have ups and downs, but it's pointing up as you have this that you're depicting here.
Yeah, I would think even more like kind of like it's like a video game. I forget the one, but the lines are kind of, the camera is moving past the lines, and the arrow is just continuing to go up. And there's going to be dips and drops, but like generally speaking, the arrow grinds its way north over time if you put the reps in.
Yep. Okay. What's
the second one?
This one's different.
The second one is, this idea of like, there is a component of resistance as well. This visual is not completely refined, but the idea that maybe this, you could even make a distinction between these two. So you have any kind of progress is ultimately there's like a force that you are resisting, or a force that you're pushing against, whether that's like internal or external. So I think what I'm trying to say here is, we could just color code this crudely for a second. Whoops. This gives you a whole new set of tools if you're going to use color,
which you normally don't.
Yeah, try to restrain it, because it's, you can get out of control. But just to illustrate this point quickly, excellence is essentially your ability to like continually push forward against resistance. So this is like the act of excellence is being able to force your way right
through,
and then this final one we talked about.
So go to the second one. So explain what the lines with the shaded in lines mean and the yellow arrows against them.
So this idea here is like, this is a progress bar. So we're all familiar with the idea of a progress bar, and maybe we could even refine this a little bit. The like excellence is really this. You know what? We could fix this. Don't need an arrow.
I love how you go through this. It's great. Okay. This is the visual part of the show, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So the like that growth is, I think, depicting the counter force is kind of an important piece of this idea.
Yeah. So you have there's something. There's always going to be something in your face. And excellence, as you've outlined here in the yellow, is the ability to keep going while understanding and embracing even the fact that there will be some sort of obstacle in your path.
Yeah, you could also do like a maze of some sort, where you you're constantly looking for a way out, and like, it's just problem solving, perpetual problem solving, I think, is another way to think about the idea of excellence, right? The more you the more you show up, the more problems you're going to bring. There's a certain irony to it, and that's why it's very difficult to continue. But the ability to push past that and hit bigger problems, I think, is that's what excellence is, right? To become a better leader, you're like solving bigger and harder problems in sequence. So there's a few different ways to visualize that. We could go on for a whole nother 90 minutes and on how to visualize it, but it's a great quote. Well, I'll stick with it for a bit longer too.
I love it. I really appreciate it. You doing this, and actually the time flew by. I'm very appreciative of your investment of your time, Jack, because I know you got a lot going on. But where would you send my viewers and listeners to learn more about you online?
I would say Twitter is probably a good place to start. So just Jack Butcher on Twitter and Visualize Value. And then, what I'd encourage is if the products that align with what I'm talking about make sense in your, in what you do, then check them out. If not, then I'd just love to have the opportunity to share how I think.
Well, it's amazing to see the conversion of tweets to sales. But part of that is, and this is something that I've talked with friends and clients and people I advise, you seem to not have any fear to ask for the sale. And I love that. I mean, I grew up, my first ever job was a telephonic sales professional making 80 cold calls a day, Jack. So nice. I love that aspect that you have no fear towards that. Maybe you can share your philosophy about why you do not. Now, you don't do it in a cheesy way or blast my email inbox, even though I'm subscribed. You don't do it that way. But you have this ability to say, no, it's part of your job. It's almost like I have a responsibility to make sure you can and should buy this. What's your thought process around selling?
Yes. So I come from the opposite school of thought as well, like the way I grew up and the jobs I had. And, even in advertising, there's this weird, like, corporate advertising at like certain scales, there's this weird, like, non-sales approach to positioning. You make the argument of like, what is brand marketing versus direct marketing? And I think one of the things that's made it very easy to do that is being completely transparent about my, like, incentives and my intent. There's no, like, hoodwinking going on, or no, like, there's no, like, really, like, nefarious idea there. I think being transparent about the things that are being taught in the products are kind of like, the promotion is an extension of that too. So I think I'm interested, and like makes it much easier to transition to like direct sales messaging at times. And there's no it took me a long time to learn this, but there's no profession, no scenario, sales is always a component of what you're doing, whether you like to admit it or not, right? If you're moving through the world and making things happen for yourself, then you have to convince people to do things at a certain point. And when you have a P&L for yourself, I think the game changes a little bit. I think I could talk at length about the difference between my mentality as an employee versus entrepreneur, and much of how I wish I would have thought about my work when I was working in other businesses. And there was like a naivety in what I, like an arrogance almost about like the amazing amount of effort and energy that had gone into constructing that business that had given me an opportunity to work there. And I just, if I was to go back to that position now, I would do it a lot differently. And just being kind of, having skin in the game to the extent where, if you don't sell something, then you have to go and take a job, or you have to, it's like, it's really tied to the relationship you have with your audience, and like that equity that you build up is, it's, you have this trust that you can't take for granted. And it's, I love to hear that it's in a way that it isn't feeling bombarded, and so much of this, because I want people to know that they can do that themselves too. Like, if you believe in what you're doing, you have
that's how I feel. I feel better about it with my own services and products when I see the video of your phone scrolling of all the Shopify purchases or Gumroad purchases. I mean, I'm sure you already heard this before, but I love seeing that. I was like, this is awesome. I remember showing my wife, I'm like, there's this new guy I'm following named Jack Butcher. I bought everything he sells, and look at this video. And it's just cool. It's very transparent. It's very honest. Hey, I don't even remember exactly what you'd say, but here's today's sales. And you just see the screen scrolling of all the notifications. Had to be a pretty good feeling too for you. Like, this is resonating. This is really working.
It's great, man. And it's like, again, to go back to the exponential, then you're never going to get that. You're never going to get that feeling for the first time, which is essentially the validation you need to scale, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are put off by the idea that, someone might not like it. It's like, well, if that person doesn't like it, they weren't going to buy from you anyway. So what? Right. I'm not really sure what you're worried about. It's bizarre, man. We're bizarre creatures. But like, once you can break through that barrier, and again, going back to the first question that we were talking about, the idea that you can defend what you're selling is all you really need to go to market and pitch it, right? If you're, I think, again, people have more of a problem, or, there's more controversy that surrounds, because it's not a face-to-face scenario, right? You wouldn't go up to somebody in a farmer's market and be like, what are you doing selling potatoes? How dare you? You would never do that. It's a different environment, and it's easier to, it's easier to throw stones in that scenario, and you will experience it at some point. It just happens. But if you're completely transparent about your incentives, and you're, you believe in the product that you've built and people have gotten results from it, then there's absolutely no reason for you to not ask people to buy what you're selling.
Love it. Jack, thanks again for being here. I'd love to do this again at some point in the future, because there is so much to get to with your story and what you teach. But so I certainly want to continue our dialogue as we both progress, man.
I love the conversation. Thank you for having me on, man.
All right. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, mate.